Want a communication and well-being workshop that actually sticks? Whether you're building trust or leveling up team accountability, we've got you. Book your custom team training via the link in the show notes.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Leading Human. It's so good to be with you here and recording in the Common House podcast studio in downtown Chattanooga. If you don't know about these common houses, they're in a few cities, Richmond, Virginia, Charlotte, and at least in the case of Chattanooga, they refurbished an old YMCA building and have made kind of a membership out of it, a co-working space, an event space, a social space. It's really cool. Chattanooga can have nice things, it seems like. We're supporting this cool place, and it's good to be here. And I just wanted to also say, kind of not really housekeeping as they say, but just like there's some show updates of how the show is evolving. I think originally when we were reshifting to Leading Human as the show that's going to basically be very similar to previous manifestations of the show, which focused on self-development work and coaching, but now with a slant of how technology impacts our lives, how we navigate those waters. Objectively, just like looking at the pros and cons of technology, figuring out how we're going to live deep and meaningful, purpose-filled lives in an era of what seems to be emerging AI. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of the solo cast as it just worked out that way, and we had a terrific May. Thank you for tuning in. The best download reports in a year's time, and so I think that the shift is meeting expectations, and so far so good. You'll notice in the previous episode that co-hosts Shelley Prevost and Alan Davis joined us, and we had a three-way conversation. Mostly I was following my curiosities and listening to them. And what I think that gives this whole show a little bit of a, I won't say shot in the arm, but some more variety for you as the listener. And for right now, the way that we're going to be moving forward with our show plans is that when Shelley and Alan dialogue, although they're completely free to do what they were doing in their previous podcast show, The Signal and the Static, they're totally free to hit some hero's journey and their lost episodes that Alan knows so very well and can follow the hero's journey in several different overlapping elements of the show Lost. But for the most part, they're going to be hitting on and they're going to be hitting on technology. And so what we're going to do on a weekly cadence with them is it's going to be a little bit more news focused, like headlines, what's up in the world of AI, what are some topics of how we're going to respond to the happenings that are so fast. It will offer a little bit more of a dimension to the show so that you might want to come to it as your go-to source for processing some of what is going on in the world of AI, as well as on a lot of the episodes that I'm going to continue to do, talk about workplace communication, topics and concepts like radical responsibility, sometimes very practical and sometimes maybe very philosophic, because what is undergirding the way that we respond and react and behave, even in our practical ways, but from the systems around us and the ways in our identities and the way that we understand ourselves and the world in which we're swimming. And to that end, I would like to introduce the topic for today. So we are beginning to taxi on the runway leading up to a series on using the Enneagram for all kinds of applications. We're going to try to give angles on communication between types that is very specific and you can also serve as your go-to source for asking a question like, well, how should an 8 communicate with a 5? Or, or whatever the combination might be. Digging into it that specifically, but leading up, we've done Enneagram series before. We've had panelists on. We've had wonderful guests on as well. We've had Ginger Lapid Bogda. We've had Jerry Wagner. We've had Chris Hewards, but many guests on who have spoken to the Enneagram on our show. But really what this is going to be is let's give a little bit more, rather than just being yet another kind of boring and obvious typology type of series of podcasts. We're going to start with not even like the origins of like how it was put together, but I would like to look at right now, the reason that I am introducing the person of GI Gurdjieff to you is because this is a profound human who is doing profound things. I mean, he wasn't a perfect human being, but wow, was he bridging a gap, I guess you could say, between East and West, and in some of what he was sharing in a real time of turmoil in the beginning of the 20th century. Basically, he was founding a school. He finally, after doing many schools and coming through quite a journey, he landed in France, in Paris, France, in I believe it was 1920, and began a school there that did become pretty famous, in part because it was so West for our Western, I guess, consciousness and culture, but it was also that a lot of famous people joined the school and just got a lot of press and attention. But this guy, Gurdjieff, was an amazing person, and I'm not sure if I want to even go into his biography so much. He was generally thought of to have been born in Armenia, so this kind of in-between space in a way of, not really Russia. He seems to be a blend of being Greek and Russian, but it's generally agreed upon that he was born in January 13th of 1866, and he died October 29th, 1949. He was a philosopher, a mystic, a spiritual teacher, even a composer, and also a dance instructor, a movements teacher. I guess I should just better say he was born in the Russian Empire at the time of it. And, there were like revolutions and lots of things were going, he had to flee. And let's see. So he, in his early adulthood, we don't really know, it's cloaked in some mystery, but he seems to have had some exposure to some maybe esoteric Christianity or some, he called it the Sarmung Brotherhood, some mystic, hermetic teachings and practices that had been practiced for perhaps even millennia that were very secret. And he had those experiences and then was effectively bringing them to the West. And so to pause there for a minute, I hope that this isn't already, you're like, who, what, Gurdjieff, what? The book, so here's the thing, right? He spoke multiple languages. He eventually did write his own book, which I would like to summarize for you and cover in another episode, an actual one. But this one that we're talking about summarizes his teachings, but is written super well. And it is called In Search of the Miraculous. And it kind of serves as both a memoir and a personal journey of a philosopher in his own right, P.D. Uspensky. You don't need, the names aren't important necessarily here. So Uspensky was this philosopher, this very highly intelligent and refined thinker, as well as he had background in journalism. And he was looking for like some very special knowledge. He was a seeker and he was looking for the deepest sources of truth. In his own journey, he had written Tertium Organum, a profound philosophical tract that he wrote at an early age in his ambition. He puts out, there's a call in the paper, and he and Gurdjieff meet for the first time. He is not impressed by Gurdjieff at first. But over time, they begin to develop a relationship, and he becomes enthralled and amazed at Gurdjieff's, how he knows some of the answers to his very challenging questions. Why am I sharing In Search of the Miraculous besides the fact that Gurdjieff has an influence on the Enneagram? Because in my personal journey, just to share this a little bit, it was the summer of 2019, and I was burning out from the work that I had been doing at a tech and logistics company called FreightWaves. It was a startup, and it's no judgment on, I can say that it was at FreightWaves, right? I had been given an opportunity to do a lot of writing and journalism myself, been given the opportunity to be a broadcaster and podcaster where I learned how to do some of this stuff in the first place. So lots of gratitude for that experience. Nevertheless, I was burning out because I really wasn't on the path. I was off my path somehow. I was off purpose in some significant ways. And I was on a little bit of a summer vacation with my wife and family. We were on a cruise. I think it was the very first cruise we've ever done. And we were going to these Grecian islands. It was a lovely, wonderful cruise. But there was also lots of processing with my wife about what I should do and my next step would be. We needed the income from my job. But I carried, so all of this in this transitional time leading up to co-founding Big Self School with Shelley, I had this, I don't know, I can't remember who recommended it, why I had it, but I had this book, In Search of the Miraculous, which was, I think, published in the late 60s without looking that up right now, and was apparently a classic in and of itself in its own time. It's well regarded and well known. You can check it out. But so as I would read a few pages, because they were kind of dense, you can't read but so much at a time. As I would read, I was more feeling the skepticism of I could identify more with the P.D. Uspensky. I didn't have any idea who he was or really this Gurdjieff was. I was just kind of reading the Q&A because that's how a lot of it's written in almost this Socratic kind of dialogue. And so Uspensky would ask, a really penetrating, challenging question that over time you're like, not only are these really like intelligent, perceptive types of inquiry, but you can tell that there is this sincere curiosity and seeking and maybe even testing at times. And yet, for as great as the questions are or were as I was reading them, I was sometimes stunned and amazed by the depth and complexity and the different angles that were taken with the responses. This was a reading experience where I began to be more, I was transformed in a sense because it was the right book at the right time and I was ready, and it opened me up to some different kinds of awarenesses and maybe practices that I would not probably have done had I kind of stayed in more of a static, intellectual, skeptical, doubting mind. Interesting stuff. So I'm going to summarize some of these summaries. You may be familiar with the Enneagram to the extent that you've taken a fun free test online and you kind of identify loosely with your type. You have maybe a curiosity, and you will begin to hear just in almost the chapter by chapter summaries. That's what I'm going to do here a little bit. Summaries through the several chapters of this book to share some of the origin of some of the ideas that we currently use in all of the Enneagram theory that you hear about, regardless of the school. From the Diamond Approach to Beatrice Chestnut and Uranio Pius and CP Enneagram, you hear it in the Narrative Enneagram, you hear it in, those three stand out. Jerry Wagner's teaching, although he's a little bit more psychological, and for my take, but he blends it all. It's very synthesized. He takes it all, he summarizes whatever sources are. This is teaching of not always growth work, but some of the very concepts that are associated with Enneagram theory. And so let's see, chapter 1 of In Search of the Miraculous, basically Uspensky gives us some of the background that I just already highlighted of his own background in esotericism, mysticism, and philosophy. He describes his meeting with Gurdjieff, which happened in Moscow in 1915. And Gurdjieff immediately challenged Uspensky's intellectual pride and introduced the idea there that humans are asleep and we are mechanical. He really draws out that metaphor of how we are machines. We're mechanical, unaware, and completely subject to outside influences without even being aware of it, because we're unaware, we're mechanical. So that he lays that out in a discussion. Chapter 2, told you this would be fast. So humans are asleep in this chapter, basically. The idea behind this, that humans are asleep. So it sounds familiar, right? You've heard this, not just in maybe Enneagram 3, you've heard this in, well, I don't want to call it yeah, it is. It's in self-improvement literature. But the Enneagram and some of my philosophy behind it is, this is not about self-improvement and getting better for the individual. This is work of undoing, and it is work of waking up. Humans are asleep. They live their lives in this waking sleep, and he had a strong take on it that we have no real consciousness or will. And he began to introduce this idea of self-observation as a way to awaken, and which is a really, really big concept. We frequently have talked about this with Big Self School for years, is this idea of to have self-awareness. Step number 1, you self-observe. And self-observation is not like self-inquiry, or you could say self-development. It is not about doing anything about it. It's just like beginning to wake up by paying a little more attention to what's going on. Self-observation. So that was In Search of the Miraculous here. Really early on, conversations a century and a decade ago, right? That we're so way ahead of his time. And he would talk about the need for a school and the impossibility of waking up on your own, which I think is very important for us in our individualistic culture. And, as I guess it's a little bit of an aside, but I'm going to start bringing some Richard Rohr thinking into some of these conversations, because he is so on to this, all of this psychological theory of the past 100-ish years. He's on it. He has written many, many books on it. So Richard Rohr has said that the church has become a place where it seems like in Christian dogma and theology has been very interpreted over now millennia as very individualized behavior modification, instead of this lived out, shared communal experience of Christ consciousness always in everything, imbued in all, and very universal, very shared. And And a lot of people, Richard Rohr notes, in today's culture obviously aren't finding it in the church, but they are making up schools of their own. Right. There's book clubs, and there's even just like we're going to work out together clubs. People are finding schools where they can develop together because people recognize that they do need this. That's, again, perhaps another subject, but we begin to see how this was introduced by Gurdjieff over 100 years ago. Chapter 3 centers in false unity. And so this was the concept right here. Like, this is very much Enneagram theory, the concept of multiple centers. The intellectual, the head types, the emotional, the heart types, and the moving, as he called it, the body types, the gut types, more an instinctual center of intelligence being but the idea that he really emphasized is to seek balance. He also introduced the idea, Gurdjieff did, of humans wrongly believe that they are unified. They believe that their I is the single I. And in reality, many different I's speak through us. And so, without Freudian literature at his disposal, he was already speaking to personality theory. He introduces an idea that really is Greek. The metaphor of the carriage is the body, and the horse is the emotions, and the driver is the mind. And the master, the true self, is present in there to be able to observe and maybe do something about with inner wisdom. So that's when in chapter 4, the fourth way, this concept is introduced because, well, what is this school going to be living in modern life? Does everybody have to go retreat and follow the path of the fakir, monk, or yogi, who all pursued knowledge in different ways, one with the body, one with the heart and belief, and one more with the head and the philosophical contemplation. But this fourth way is intended to integrate all three and to pursue it in everyday life, not having to do it in seclusion. So there's this emphasis on balance, presence, and intentional effort. So through that, this is profound stuff. If you're still with me here, right? This is way ahead of its time, and it's in our time now. So not that we need to attribute all of this credit to, what an incredible person Gurdjieff was. Yes, he was, but he was obviously, he was a bridge. He was translating wisdom that he had learned in these esoteric schools that was not known in the West. And that's fascinating. In chapter 5, the ray of creation. Now, I'm going to say what it's about, but I have to admit that I struggled with this chapter and really understanding it. It's where the cosmological teachings begin and the introduction of the ray of creation, a hierarchy of worlds from the absolute to the moon. The law of 3 and the law of 7 are introduced as governing all processes in the universe, which is, I think, pretty Pythagorean. So cosmology aside, chapter 6 has 2 laws that we see operating in the universe that are a part of many teachings of the Enneagram. These laws are like principles of the universe, and I think that's why the cosmology needed to be introduced in 5 for us to understand the context of the idea of the law of 1, by the way, is just that there is unity in all things. It's a spiritual law. And there's 2 other important laws, the law of 3, and you can almost kind of anticipate what it is, right? It's that every phenomena results from 3 forces, active, passive, and neutral. Neutron, proton, electron. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That kind of concept. And then the law of 7. Nothing in the universe develops in a straight line, that processes need shocks in order to stay on course. 7's right there up at that number where the frequency is ready to change and go to the next level. But in order to do that, you almost need an outside force that hits you, often in a shocking way, but in a way that ends up leading to a transformation and going. So if you notice that there are 8 notes on a scale, right? I've been playing piano, and I know after I go through my notes from middle C all the way up to the 7th note B, the 8th note back is to C. And so this idea of, there is this principle of after 7, the law of 7, when you need a shock, you then can level up or evolve to the next level by hitting the next octave up in your growth. And on that note, we are going to pause and take a little bit of a break. Hope that you're thinking hard about your next direction on your own leveling up and this idea of what it means to hit the next octave in your growth journey. As I promised, we would only do commute length episodes. Stay tuned and just select the very next episode if you would like to continue on our journey for the next half of looking at Gurdjieff and what he is talking about in this powerful and amazing book, In Search of the Miraculous.